Reading from Mark. Jesus and his disciples went into Capernaum. And when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Just then there was in the synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent, and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. So, church, today we're going to talk about evil spirits, unclean spirits, and the demonic. So go ahead and shift about in your seats. It's an uncomfortable topic for most of us 21st century folk. We are quite happy to be Jesus' followers when it comes to feeding the poor, praying for one another, or proclaiming God's way of justice and mercy. But casting out demons? In Mark's gospel, casting out demons isn't something secondary to the good news. Rather, it's an essential part of it. There are 4 exorcisms in Mark's short book. Many of us dismiss it or are freaked out by it, rather than grateful or excited or even curious about it. So let's explore today's story, looking at it from the viewpoints of its 4 groups: Jesus, the demons, the man who was possessed, and the crowd at the synagogue. Inhabiting the story through these 4 lenses might help us believe, despite our unbelief. So, first point of view, Jesus. Jesus is fresh from his baptism and wilderness experience. Immediately after he is baptized, the Spirit drives him out into the wilderness for his showdown with the chief evil spirit, Satan. And Jesus resists temptation for 40 long days. In fact, the wilderness experience is so taxing that God sends angels to wait on Jesus. Perhaps this encounter with the demonic shapes Jesus' compassion for us and clarifies his mission. Yes, people make mistakes and are sinful. But there are forces far beyond us and way outside our control that draw us away from truth, goodness, and beauty. In short, that seduce us away from God. In this brief story, at the beginning of Mark, Jesus in the local synagogue is in the local synagogue teaching with authority. He doesn't know about God. He knows God directly. And there's a big difference. And during his teaching, a man with an unclean spirit interrupts him, yells at him, disturbs the whole congregation. Jesus responds with calm strength, rebuking that spirit and freeing the man for the abundant life God meant for him to live. Second point of view, the unclean spirit. This demon is smart. He knows before any human being does who it is he is dealing with, the Holy One of God. He vies for command in the possessed man and doesn't want Jesus' interference. You see, in the presence of goodness, evil often interrupts and tries to get our attention. One of the ways it tries to hold on to its power is by shaming the person it occupies. Shame is a powerful force, and demons exploit it to bind and restrict people all the time. This unclean spirit also seems to have a community of other evil spirits and rightly feels threatened by the presence and power of the one who knows God. So it cries out, "What have you to do with us?" Third point of view, the man who is possessed. Did he feel embarrassed and ashamed? How much choice or control did he have in all of this? Was there some sort of terrible struggle within him? His true self, the part that bears the image of God, desired liberation and wholeness. Maybe that's the part of him that drew him to the synagogue, a holy place. He probably felt trapped by this spirit, knowing and thinking, that's not the real me. Can you relate to this at all? Like when a parent loses their temper with their toddler. Or when someone living in the grips of an addiction doesn't recognize the person they've become. Can you relate to that idea of the gap between who you most truly are and how you sometimes act? Fourth point of view, the crowd, the folks in the synagogue. They had been amazed by Jesus' teaching, his clear authority, his presence. How did they feel when the man started screaming? Disgusted? Why can't he get control over himself? Were they afraid? What if that happened to me? Did they feel threatened? What if I don't have as much control as I thought I did? Surely all of them were shaken up after Jesus rebuked the demon. In those moments, they had seen God's power triumph over the forces of evil, and they went out to tell others about it, to process what they had seen. So, as we reflect on this story from 4 points of view, take these observations for your consideration. Evil exists. This story doesn't offer us any explanation for where evil spirits come from, much less why they exist, much less why this particular demon afflicts this particular guy. The story simply acknowledges the reality. Evil is a force that tends toward death, physical or literal, over which we often have little, if any, control. We are held in bondage by it. Optimistic human beings tend to overestimate our ability to overcome evil, and our pride gets in the way. If I only do X, Y, or Z, then I can handle this, fill in the blank, addiction, rage, violence. If I really focus on eliminating this problem, I can overcome it. As a result, we are reluctant to ask for God's aid, for God's help. When we are dealing with evil, with the demonic, the sooner we can admit our need for help, the better. Like the first step in 12-step wisdom, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. God's power is stronger than Satan's. Or as the poet puts it in the Song of Songs, love is stronger than death. As the second step says, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And coming to believe in this power, we are able to ask for divine aid. Sometimes this comes directly from God, as it did for the man in the story. Jesus was there. He rebuked the demons. The man was free. But for many of us, divine intervention can also be mediated through other human beings. A wise therapist, spiritual friendships, 12-step programs. And divine intervention happens through what we are doing right now. In worship, the divine liturgy, God draws our attention toward his good purposes and equips us, yes, even us modern-day disciples, to cast out demons. Now, it's understandable if this good news is hard to take in, to process, to believe. In the fourth and final exorcism that Jesus performs in Mark, Mark anticipates how hard this stuff is for us to grasp. You probably remember the story, the healing of the boy with the unclean spirit. The father desperately approaches Jesus, afraid for his boy's life. His son is regularly cast into water and fire. The father prays, perhaps as we do today, I believe. Help my unbelief. And Jesus frees the boy from the demon into the life God intended for him.